welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving headfirst into bug bounty programs. Think of it as organizations putting out the call to ethical hackers, right? Like, hey, can you find our security weaknesses before the bad guys do?
Exactly.
It's a really fascinating and, well, constantly evolving corner of cybersecurity.
Absolutely. And if you've ever wondered how these programs actually work, from the very basics to maybe what skills are involved if you want to participate, well, this is the deep dive for you.
Yeah.
We've got a great set of sources here that give a pretty comprehensive picture of the field.
Exactly. So our mission today is to pull out the most important insights from this Mastering Bug Bounty course outline and some other materials we have.
Right.
We want to give you a clear and hopefully engaging understanding of what these programs are all about and what it really takes to get in the game.
Sounds good.
Okay, so where do we even begin? How do these things start?
Yeah, let's start there. Looking at how bug bounty programs have actually come to be. What's interesting is that they weren't always the mainstream security practice they are today.
Really?
Yeah, they really evolved from more informal initiatives, sort of grassroots things, into the structured programs we see now.
Right. It's kind of amazing to think about, isn't it? What started almost as, like you said, a grassroots effort is now a key part of how so many organizations think about their security.
Definitely.
And it's not just the companies that are getting something out of this, is it? I mean, what really gets ethical hackers interested? Why participate?
Well, if we look at the bigger picture, it's a really interesting mix of motivations.
Okay.
Obviously, there can be financial rewards, and those can be pretty significant sometimes.
Money talks.
Right. But beyond that, many hackers are driven by the desire for recognition within the security community.
Ah, okay. Reputation.
Yeah, imagine the boost to your rep when you find a major flaw in some widely used piece of software.
Right. Yeah, bragging rights.
Totally. And it's also just a fantastic way to hone your skills in a real-world environment and, to contribute to making the internet a safer place overall.
That's a good point.
I've even heard stories of hackers who landed great job opportunities directly because of, their impressed bug bounty track record.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so when we talk about rewards, it's not always just a cash payout then.
That's correct. Yeah, many programs offer other types of incentives.
Like what?
This could include things like being publicly acknowledged on a leaderboard, which, can be a big deal in the community. Some programs have tiered reward systems where finding more critical bugs or, say, demonstrating exceptional skill unlocks higher payouts or maybe more exclusive opportunities.
Interesting.
And sometimes there are special bonuses for finding particularly innovative or high-impact vulnerabilities. The key, though, is that these rewards, whatever form they take, should be governed by clear and transparent guidelines.
Okay, clear rules. Got it. So say someone's listening and thinking, okay, this sounds interesting. I want to check this out. Where would they even start looking for these programs? There must be loads.
Yeah, that raises a crucial question. How do you choose the right bug bounty platform? There are several things to keep in mind.
Yeah.
First, reputation is really important. You want to work with platforms that are known for being trustworthy, handling reports and payouts fairly.
Right. Trust is key.
Definitely. The scope of the programs offered on the platform is also key. Do they align with your areas of interest and maybe your skill set?
Good point.
A platform with a large and active community can also be a big plus. You can learn a lot from other researchers there.
Ah, the community aspect.
Yeah. And finally, consider the level of support the platform provides, both to the organizations running the programs and, importantly, to the bug hunters themselves.
Okay, that makes sense. So you found a platform, you see a program that catches your eye. What's the absolute first thing you need to understand before you even think about touching anything?
Understanding the rules and guidelines is absolutely paramount, non-negotiable.
Okay.
This includes having a crystal clear understanding of the scope limitations, exactly which systems and applications are you allowed to test.
Right. What's fair game?
Exactly. And you must, without exception, obtain proper authorization before you start any testing.
Super important.
Then there's the process for how you need to document and report any findings, what the expected communication etiquette is with the organization,
Okay.
and whether there are any non-disclosure agreements, NDAs you need to agree to.
Right. Legal stuff.
Yeah. It's also critical to make sure you're not submitting reports for vulnerabilities that have already been reported by someone else duplicates.
Ah, avoid duplicates. Good tip.
And above all, you must never, under any circumstances, try to exploit a vulnerability for your own personal gain beyond the agreed-upon reward.
That last part feels especially important, sort of the core ethical line, right? Zooming out a bit, what are the bigger ethical considerations that bug hunters need to keep in mind through this whole process?
Yeah, ethical considerations are really the bedrock of responsible bug bounty hunting. It's about maintaining a high standard of ethical behavior in everything you do.
Oh.
This means always being mindful of ethical boundaries, prioritizing the protection of user privacy and any data you might encounter, and ensuring that all your actions are in compliance with the law.
Right. Stay legal.
And because this field is constantly evolving, like we said, staying up to date on ethical best practices is also essential. It's ongoing.
These are all really crucial things to keep in mind. Okay, let's think about those active questions in our outline. First one, how have these programs fundamentally changed how organizations approach security?
I think the biggest change is that bug bounty programs have allowed organizations to tap into a much more diverse and, frankly, global pool of security talent.
Ah, okay. Wider reach.
Yeah, much more than they could ever achieve with just their in-house teams. It's a much more dynamic way to identify a wider range of potential weaknesses, and often it can actually be a more cost-effective approach as well. Well, imagine a startup, for example. They might not have the resources to hire a huge security team right off the bat.
Sure.
But a bug bounty program allows them to leverage the skills of researchers worldwide, often paying only for valid results.
That's a great point. Okay, next question. Beyond the money, what do you think truly motivates ethical hackers to jump in?
Well, the financial incentives are definitely a draw, no question. But our sources suggest that reputation within the security community is a very strong motivator.
All right, that recognition again.
Yeah, and the challenge,
Yeah.
finding complex and elusive vulnerabilities, that intellectual stimulation of problem solving.
The puzzle.
Exactly. And the satisfaction of contributing to a more secure digital world. That's also a key driver for many. It's almost like a competitive sport for some, finding the most interesting and impactful bugs.
If you personally were going to pick a bug bounty platform to work with, what would be your top priorities? Why?
Good question. For me, I think I'd prioritize the reputation of the platform first, and then the scope of the programs they offer. A platform with a strong reputation is just more likely to handle reports fairly and make sure rewards are paid out reliably.
Makes sense.
And a broad range of programs would give me more opportunities to apply my skills to different types of systems and technologies that, I might find interesting, keep things fresh.
Okay. Why is understanding the scope of a bug bounty program absolutely paramount? Like, what could realistically happen if a tester just decides to ignore it and poke around elsewhere?
Understanding the scope is, it's non-negotiable. Testing systems that are explicitly out of scope can have very serious legal and ethical repercussions.
Like what?
You could easily be seen as conducting unauthorized hacking, which could lead to legal action from the company, damage your reputation within the security community permanently, and potentially even result in criminal charges. It's not worth the risk, ever.
Right. Absolutely not. Okay, last one for this module. Let's say you're testing within scope, doing everything right, and you accidentally stumble upon a major security flaw in the system that's outside the defined scope. What's the ethical tightrope you're on? How should a responsible hacker handle that according to our sources?
Yeah, that's a really delicate situation. Ethically, okay, you've discovered a security issue. That feels important.
Right.
However, your agreement with the program specifically limited your testing to certain areas. So the responsible approach, according to our sources, is to immediately stop testing that out-of-scope system. Full stop.
Okay. Stop immediately.
Then you should report your accidental finding to the program owners through their established communication channels. Make it very clear that you discovered it unintentionally while testing within scope.
Got it. Transparency.
Absolutely. And you absolutely should not attempt to exploit it further or, disclose it publicly without their explicit permission. Let them handle it.
That's really important guidance. Okay, solid foundation. Let's move on to Module 2, Essential Ethical Hacking Skills. And the first thing our outline mentions is setting up your own ethical hacking lab. Why is that considered so crucial for someone wanting to get into bug bounties?
Right. Well, a dedicated ethical hacking lab provides a safe and crucially controlled environment for you to practice and experiment.
Safe space.
Exactly. You can try various hacking techniques and tools without the risk of causing any harm to real-world systems or data. Think of it as your own cybersecurity training ground.
Okay.
You can make mistakes, learn from them, without any real-world consequences.
So for someone just starting out, how would they actually go about setting up one of these labs? It sounds kind of intimidating, honestly.
It doesn't have to be overly complicated to begin with. The process really starts by thinking about what you want to learn. Like, what areas of ethical hacking are you most interested in exploring?
Define your goals.
Yeah. Then you'll need to consider your hardware and software. Virtualization software is incredibly useful here, something like VirtualBox or VMware.
Why virtualization?
Because it allows you to run multiple operating systems and even intentionally vulnerable environments on a single physical computer. Super efficient and safe.
Okay. Makes sense.
You'll need to choose operating systems for both your attacking machine, maybe Kali Linux, and your target systems. Then you'll start installing a range of ethical hacking tools. Then a really important step is then setting up those intentionally vulnerable environments where you can safely practice your skills. Things like Metasploitable or DVWA.
Setting up vulnerable environments sounds, well, intentionally risky, doesn't it? What does that actually involve?
It means deliberately creating systems or applications that have known security weaknesses. It sounds risky, but it's all contained within your lab.
Okay. Contained risk.
Exactly.
Okay.
This could involve using older, unpatched software versions, maybe intentionally misconfiguring security settings, or deploying web applications that are specifically designed to be vulnerable, like the ones I mentioned.
Right.
The whole point is to create realistic scenarios where you can test your ability to identify and exploit these flaws in a controlled way. Learn by doing safely.
Okay, lab is up and running, virtually speaking.
Yeah.
What are some of the really foundational technical skills that someone needs to get a handle on?
Our sources really emphasize mastering networking fundamentals. That's huge.
Networking.
This includes a solid understanding of the OSI model, how different network protocols and services work together across various layers.
The 7 layers.
Yeah, knowing what happens at each layer is key. You also need to understand IP addressing, subnetting, network protocols like TCP/IP and DNS, and the basics of network scanning.
Why scanning?
Well, knowing how to scan a network helps you identify active devices and the services they're running. It's like creating a map of the territory.
And it's not just about seeing what's there, is it? You also need to understand what's happening with the data that's flowing around the network.
Absolutely. Network analysis and troubleshooting skills are vital. Tools like Wireshark.
Wireshark. Heard that.
Yeah, it's essential. It allows you to capture and examine network traffic in detail, really helps you understand how data is being transmitted, diagnose network issues, and also, crucially, spot potential security vulnerabilities just by looking at the patterns of communication.
Okay. Our outline also highlights web application security testing as a key skill. Where should someone start with that whole area?
Yeah, web apps are massive in bug bounty. The starting point is understanding some of the most common types of vulnerabilities.
Like what?
Things like injection attacks, where malicious code is inserted into application inputs. SQL injection is a big one.
Right.
And cross-site scripting or XSS attacks, which target users' web browsers. Those are fundamental concepts to grasp. You also need to understand how web applications manage user sessions and where those processes can be vulnerable.
Okay. And before you even start actively testing a system, poking at it, there's a crucial step of just gathering information first, right? Reconnaissance.
Exactly. That's where effective reconnaissance techniques come into play. Footprinting, which involves gathering preliminary info about a target. Think of it like doing your homework, getting the lay of the land.
Okay.
And open source intelligence, or OSINT. That's all about collecting publicly available information from various sources, Google, social media, company websites, etc.
OSINT, right.
These are invaluable for understanding the target's attack surface before you ever send a single potentially malicious request.
So you've done your recon. You think you found a potential weakness.
Yeah.
How do you approach actually trying to exploit it safely and ethically? What are the rules there?
The key here is always exploit vulnerabilities safely and responsibly. Always.
Oh,
It goes back to having proper authorization. You should only be testing within the agreed upon scope. We keep saying scope, but it's that important.
absolutely.
You need to carefully plan your exploitation attempts to minimize any potential for harm or disruption to the target system or its users. Minimal impact.
Right. Do no harm.
Exactly. Thoroughly documenting every step you take and every finding you make is absolutely crucial for reporting later. And again, always prioritize respecting user privacy, sharing your knowledge responsibly within ethical boundaries, commit to continuous learning, and always, always operate within the bounds of the law.
Okay, let's dig into those active questions for this module. First up, what might be the very first tool someone should set up in their lab? Why is it so foundational?
The very first tool. I'd argue that a virtualization platform like VirtualBox or VMware is the absolute foundation.
The virtualization software itself.
Yeah. Without it, creating those isolated and diverse testing environments becomes incredibly difficult and, frankly, much riskier. It's the essential platform that allows you to build the rest of your lab securely and effectively. Everything else builds on that.
Okay. When you're scanning a network, trying to identify potential weaknesses, which layer of the OSI model do you think is most relevant at that initial stage? And how does understanding that layer guide your search?
Well, the network layer, layer 3, which deals with IP addressing and routing, is very relevant during that initial network scanning phase.
Layer 3.
Understanding this layer helps you identify which devices are even reachable on the network. It's about finding the addresses. Then, as you start to probe specific services running on those devices, you'll be more concerned with the transport layer, layer 4.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that deals with things like TCP and UDP ports. So, knowing the OSI model provides a framework for understanding how network communication works at different levels, which helps you target your testing much more effectively. It guides the process.
Imagine you've stumbled upon a potential cross-site scripting,
Yeah.
an XSS vulnerability. What are some critical ethical and safety checks that absolutely must be done before you even think about trying to exploit it based on what we've discussed?
Okay, potential XSS. Well, the very first thing, again, is double check that the specific web application and the part of it where you found the potential flaw are actually within the defined scope of the bug bounty program.
Scope check first, always.
Always. Assuming it is, you then need to carefully plan your exploitation attempt to ensure it's non-destructive and doesn't impact other users.
How do you do that?
This might involve using a very simple payload, like an alert script, just to confirm the vulnerability exists without causing any actual harm or data manipulation. You also need to ensure you're not accessing any sensitive data that you're not authorized to see. Keep it simple, keep it safe.
Got it. Finally, how can simply gathering publicly available information using OSINT techniques actually help you uncover potential weaknesses in a system before you have any direct interaction with it, like before you scan anything?
Oh, OSINT can reveal a surprising amount of information that can be incredibly useful for a bug hunter. It's amazing what's out there.
Like what?
You might find out what software versions the target organization is using, maybe from job postings or public reports. And those versions might have known publicly disclosed vulnerabilities. Easy win sometimes.
Okay.
You could discover employee information that might give you clues about internal systems or naming conventions, not for attacking them, but for understanding the structure.
Right. Context.
Exactly. You might even find misconfigured cloud storage buckets or exposed databases that the organization didn't realize were public. It's all about piecing together the target's digital footprint from freely available data.
That's really insightful. Okay, let's move on to Module 4, Web Application Attacks and Exploits. Considering how much of our online lives revolve around web apps, this is clearly a huge area for bug bounty hunters, right?
It absolutely is. Web applications are just so prevalent, and they often handle a lot of sensitive data, making them a prime target for both malicious actors and, thankfully, ethical hackers participating in bug bounty programs.
Our outline mentions several common web application vulnerabilities that ethical hackers frequently encounter. Can you give us a quick overview of some of the most important ones, the big hitters?
Certainly. Cross-site scripting, XSS, as we've mentioned, allows attackers to inject malicious scripts into web pages viewed by other users. That's a classic.
Okay.
SQL injection lets attackers manipulate a web application's database, potentially stealing or modifying data through specially crafted SQL queries. Very dangerous.
Yeah, heard about that one.
Then you have server-side vulnerabilities like command injection, path traversal, and server-side request forgery, or SSRF. These can potentially give attackers access to the underlying server itself.
Whoa.
And on the client side, so in the user's browser, common issues include cross-site request forgery, CSRF, client-side validation bypass, and insecure direct object references, often called IDOR.
Okay, you broke down XSS into stringered, reflected, and DOM-based before. Can you briefly explain the key differences again? Just a quick refresher.
Sure. Stored XSS is where the malicious script is permanently saved on the server, maybe in a database, like in a comment section or a forum post.
Okay, it sticks around.
Yeah, and then it gets displayed to other users who view that content later. Reflected XSS happens when the malicious script is included in a request, maybe as a URL parameter, like in a search query.
Right.
And then the server reflects that script back to the user in the response without properly cleaning it up or sanitizing it.
So it bounces off the server.
Exactly. And DOM-based XSS is a bit different. The vulnerability exists entirely in the client-side JavaScript code itself. The JavaScript manipulates the document object model, the DOM, in an unsafe way that allows the attacker's script to execute within the user's browser, often without ever touching the server.
Got it. SQL injection always sounds particularly dangerous. How does an attacker actually pull that off? What does it look like?
Yeah, SQL injection exploits situations where a web application uses user-provided input directly in a SQL database query without properly sanitizing or validating that input first. That's the key mistake.
So trusting user input too much.
Precisely. By injecting malicious SQL code into, say, a login form or a search bar, an attacker can potentially bypass authentication, retrieve sensitive data they shouldn't see, modify database records, or sometimes even execute arbitrary commands on the database server itself.
Wow.
There are also more advanced techniques like blind SQL injection and time-based attacks that attackers can use even when they don't see direct output from their injected code. They infer things based on server responses or timing.
Okay. You also mentioned server-side vulnerabilities like command injection. What kind of impact can those have? What can an attacker do?
Command injection vulnerabilities occur when an attacker can inject operating system commands like Linux or Windows commands into an application's input.
Oh.
And the application then executes those commands on the server. This can give the attacker a lot of control over the server, potentially allowing them to read sensitive files, modify system configurations, install malware, or even take complete control of the machine.
Full takeover.
Potentially, yeah. Path traversal vulnerabilities allow attackers to navigate outside of the web application's intended file directory structure and access other files and directories on the server they shouldn't see.
Like reading config files.
Exactly. And server-side request forgery, SSRF, that can be used to make the vulnerable server itself send requests to other internal or external resources.
Why is that bad?
Because it can be used to bypass firewalls and access internal services that aren't directly exposed to the internet. Finding these kinds of server-side flaws often requires careful manual code review by the developers or testers.
And what about those client-side vulnerabilities like CSRF? How do those work? Are they less serious?
Not necessarily less serious, just different. Cross-site request forgery, or CSRF, is a type of attack where an attacker tricks a logged-in user into performing unintended actions on a web application they're already authenticated to.
How do they trick them?
For example, they might send a user a link in an email or embed something on a malicious website that, when clicked or viewed, unknowingly makes a request to the legitimate web application, say, to transfer money or change their email address using the user's logged-in sessions.
Sneaky.
Very. Client-side validation bypass is when an application relies on JavaScript running in the user's browser to validate input, like checking if an email address looks valid.
Right.
But an attacker can easily bypass these checks by disabling JavaScript or manipulating the web request after the check happens but before it's sent to the server.
So client-side checks aren't real security.
They're good for user experience, but not for security. Security checks must be on the server. Insecure direct object references, IDOR, happen when an application exposes internal object identifiers like database record IDs, user ID 123, order ID 456, in URLs or parameters, in a way that allows an attacker to guess or manipulate them to access resources they shouldn't be able to, like viewing someone else's order just by changing the ID number in the URL.
Oh, yeah, I can see that. Our outline also mentions techniques for bypassing web application security controls. That sounds like a constant cat and mouse game between attackers and defenders.
It absolutely is. As developers implement security measures like web application firewalls, WAFs, or input filters to protect web applications, attackers are constantly trying to find clever ways to circumvent those controls.
Yeah.
This can involve techniques like carefully encoding their malicious input to evade filters, exploiting logical flaws in how the security controls are implemented, finding subtle ways to smuggle requests past a wave, or even finding weaknesses in the underlying technologies the controls rely on. This is where having hands-on experience with various attack tools and techniques and just creative thinking is really crucial for a bug bounty hunter.
Let's dive into the active questions for Module 4. First, think about something as common as a website search bar. How could that seemingly innocent feature become a gateway for a serious SQL injection attack?
Right. Imagine a website takes the text you enter into the search bar and directly uses it without cleaning it in a SQL query to search its product database.
Okay, it's normal.
But if the website doesn't properly sanitize your input first, you could enter specially crafted SQL code instead of a regular search term, something like OR11.
What does that do?
That extra SQL code could manipulate the original query in unintended ways. The OR11 part might always evaluate to true, potentially causing the query to return all products instead of just the ones matching your non-existent search term. The comments out the rest of the original query. This could allow you to bypass the search logic, maybe dump entire tables, or even execute other malicious SQL commands depending on the vulnerability, all from a simple search bar.
Wow. Okay. When you find a potential flaw on the server side of an application, what's the critical difference between just reporting its existence, saying, I think there's command injection here, and actually demonstrating the impact through a controlled exploit? Why is showing impact important?
Simply reporting a potential server-side vulnerability, like saying, parameter X seems vulnerable to command injection, is a good first step. It alerts the team. But actually demonstrating its impact with a well-documented, safe, controlled exploit provides much stronger evidence of the actual risk.
Makes it real.
Exactly. It shows the program owners exactly what an attacker could do if they were to exploit that vulnerability, like reading a specific non-sensitive file or showing you can execute a harmless command like whammy. This helps them understand the severity of the issue much better and prioritize fixing it. A working proof of concept, or POC, makes the threat much more tangible than just a theoretical description.
Why is relying solely on the website's checks on your computer, the client-side validation we talked about, why is that not considered a robust security solution for the website developers? Why can't they just trust the browser check?
Because anything that happens on the client side within your web browser is ultimately under the control of the user, not the website owner. A malicious user can easily bypass or disable JavaScript code that performs client-side validation. They can use browser developer tools, proxy tools like Burp Suite, to intercept and manipulate the web request after the client-side check is done, but before it's even sent to the server.
So the server never sees the original bad data.
The server sees whatever the attacker sends it, regardless of what the JavaScript tried to prevent. Therefore, any security-critical validation checking permissions, ensuring data integrity, preventing attacks, must always be performed on the server side, where the application has full control over the processing of the data and can't be bypassed by the user.
Can you imagine a simple scenario where a weakness on the user side, the client side, combined with a weakness on the website's server, could lead to a much bigger security problem than either vulnerability on its own? Chaining vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. That happens all the time. Let's say a website has a file upload form. It uses JavaScript, client-side, to check the file extension, maybe only allowing .jpg or .png uploads.
Okay, seems reasonable.
An attacker could easily bypass this check by simply renaming a malicious script file, say malware.php, to malware.jpg before uploading it. The client-side check passes.
Right.
Now, let's say the server-side code that processes these uploaded image files has a separate vulnerability, maybe a local file inclusion, LFI, or even command injection vulnerability, where it doesn't properly sanitize the file name when it tries to process or display the image later.
Uh-oh.
The attacker could then potentially trigger the server-side flaw, maybe by crafting a request that causes the server to execute their malware.jpg file as if it were PHP code. So the weak client-side check allows the malicious file to get onto the server, and the server-side flaw then allows it to be executed. This leads to a much more severe compromise, like remote code execution, than either vulnerability could achieve in isolation.
That's a really clear illustration of chaining. Okay, let's shift our focus now to Module 5, mobile application security. With so many of us using apps on our phones for just about everything, security here is obviously a huge concern too.
It certainly is. Mobile applications present a unique set of security challenges compared to traditional web applications, largely due to their specific architecture and the environments they run in iOS, Android, etc.
Can you briefly explain the typical architecture of a mobile app and why that's relevant from a security standpoint? What are the pieces?
Sure. Mobile apps generally have a front-end component that runs directly on your phone or tablet. That's the app you interact with.
Okay.
And usually a back-end component that typically resides on a server somewhere, often in the cloud.
Right, the server part.
The app on your device communicates with this back-end server, often through APIs, application programming interfaces, to exchange data and get functionality. Think logging in, fetching data, submitting forms.
Okay.
Additionally, mobile apps often store data locally on the device itself, settings, cache data, sometimes even sensitive info. Understanding these different components, the app, the API, the local storage, the backend server, and how they interact is crucial because each of these areas can introduce potential security vulnerabilities.
Right. Multiple points of failure.
Exactly. From how data is transmitted between the app and the server to how securely data is stored on the device itself.
Our outline mentions reverse engineering mobile apps as a technique used in security testing. What exactly does that involve? Sounds complex.
It can be, yeah. Reverse engineering a mobile app involves taking the compiled application code, the .apk file on Android or .ipa on iOS, and analyzing it to understand how it works internally. Decompiling it, essentially.
Why do that?
Ethical hackers do this to look for security vulnerabilities hidden in the code, to understand the app's internal logic, find hard-coded secrets like API keys, and identify any potential weaknesses that might not be apparent just from using the app in a normal way. It's like taking apart a complex machine to see how all the pieces fit together and where there might be flaws in the design or construction that aren't visible from the outside.
And what are some of the common types of vulnerabilities that are specifically found in mobile applications? Things unique to mobile.
Our sources highlight insecure data storage as a significant concern.
Storing stuff on the phone insecurely.
Yeah. If sensitive user data, like passwords, tokens, personal information, isn't properly encrypted or protected when stored on the mobile device, it could be vulnerable if the device is lost, stolen, or compromised by malware.
Right. Physical access matters more.
Exactly. Improper session management is another common issue where user sessions aren't securely handled, potentially allowing attackers to hijack sessions or gain unauthorized access to user accounts.
Okay.
Also, vulnerabilities in how the app communicates with its backend servers are huge.
Yeah.
Especially if sensitive data is transmitted over unencrypted channels, plain HTTP instead of HTTPS, which can expose that data to interception on insecure networks like public Wi-Fi.
You also mentioned the importance of analyzing and potentially exploiting the APIs that mobile apps use. Why is that a key area of focus for mobile testing?
Because mobile apps heavily rely on APIs to communicate with backend services for almost everything. User authentication, retrieving data, performing actions.
They're the messengers.
Pretty much. If these APIs aren't secured properly, an attacker might be able to bypass security controls by directly interacting with the API endpoints, maybe from their own computer, not even using the app.
Wow.
They could intercept the communication between the app and the API to figure out how it works, then try to bypass authentication mechanisms, access data they shouldn't, or even manipulate the data being exchanged. Weak APIs can undermine the security of the entire application.
Data storage and encryption vulnerabilities seem like they could have pretty direct consequences for users if their phone data gets exposed. What are the main things a bug hunter would be looking for in this area?
The primary concern is ensuring that any sensitive data stored locally on the mobile device in files, databases, preferences is encrypted using strong, modern encryption algorithms.
Strong encryption, okay.
Bug hunters would be looking for instances where sensitive data is stored in plain text, or maybe encrypted using weak or outdated methods, or using hard-coded encryption keys right in the app's code.
Hard-coded keys, yikes.
Yeah, surprisingly common. They'd also be examining how the app manages encryption keys. Are they stored securely? Are they derived properly? Vulnerabilities in any of these areas could lead to the exposure of sensitive user information if someone gets access to the phone's storage.
Briefly, what are some of the best practices that mobile app developers should be following to make their apps more secure from the start? How can they avoid these issues?
Well, our sources emphasize the importance of building security and from the very beginning, secure by design. This includes using secure coding practices consistently,
Like what?
properly validating all input, both from the user and from APIs, using well-vetted standard security libraries for common tasks like encryption and authentication, rather than trying to roll your own.
Don't reinvent the wheel badly.
Exactly. Strong authentication and authorization mechanisms are crucial, ensuring that all sensitive data is stored securely using strong encryption and transmitted over secure channels like HTTPS with proper certificate validation. Developers should also consider techniques to make it harder to reverse engineer their apps, like code obfuscation, though that's not a perfect defense. And they absolutely need a plan for regular security updates and patching of any vulnerabilities that are discovered after release.
And for ethical hackers who are interested in testing mobile apps, what are some of the specialized tools they might typically use? Is it different from web testing tools?
Yeah, there are specialized tools. Just like with web app testing, there are specific tools and frameworks designed for mobile app security testing.
Examples.
These can help with static analysis, examining the app's code without running it, using tools like MobSF or JADAX to look for potential vulnerabilities. They also include tools for dynamic analysis, running the app in a controlled environment, maybe an emulator or a rooted device, and monitoring its behavior, file system interactions, network traffic. And there are proxy tools similar to Burp Suite, but sometimes configured differently for mobile, that allow you to intercept and analyze the network traffic between the mobile app and its backend servers. That's crucial for testing that API security we talked about. Getting hands-on experience with these types of tools is essential for effective mobile app bug hunting.
Let's tackle the actor questions for Module 5. First, why might a mobile app developer choose to store your data in a way that's not very secure? It seems counterintuitive. And what are the potential real-world consequences for you as a user?
Well, sometimes developers might prioritize, say, ease of implementation or maybe app performance over implementing robust security for local storage.
Cutting corners.
Sometimes unintentionally. They might just use the default storage mechanisms provided by the operating system without adding extra layers of encryption, assuming the OS handles it. Or they might make incorrect assumptions about the security of the device itself. Maybe they think, oh, the phone has a passcode, it's fine.
Which isn't always enough.
Right. The potential consequences for users can be quite severe if that data leaks. It could range from the theft of personal information, like addresses, contacts, messages, to the compromise of financial data if it's a banking app, potentially leading to account takeovers, theft of session tokens, or even identity theft if enough sensitive PII is exposed.
If you could actually look at the communication happening between a mobile app on your phone and its servers, maybe using one of those proxy tools, what kinds of weaknesses in those conversations might you be specifically looking for as a bug hunter?
You'd be looking for several things. First, sensitive data usernames, passwords, session tokens, personal info being transmitted over unencrypted connections, plain HTTP. That's a huge red flag.
Easy interception.
Definitely on insecure networks. You'd also be examining the authentication mechanisms. Are they weak? Can they be bypassed? How are API keys or session tokens handled? Are they predictable? Do they expire? You'd look for insecure handling of those keys or tokens, and you'd be trying to identify any opportunities to manipulate the API calls themselves to access data or functionality that you shouldn't be able to, maybe fetching another user's data by changing an ID in the request. Testing the API logic directly.
What are the fundamental differences and unique hurdles that you face when you're testing the security of an app that's installed directly on your phone versus testing a website that you just visit in your browser? What makes mobile testing different?
Well, with mobile apps, you're dealing with an application that's running directly on a specific operating system, iOS or Android, on a particular device. That OS has its own set of permissions, security controls, and potential vulnerabilities.
Right, the OS layer.
Yeah. You also have to consider local data storage security, which isn't usually a factor from typical website testing from a user perspective.
Right.
And the specific APIs the app uses can vary greatly and need direct testing.
And the reverse engineering.
Right, that's a big difference. Reverse engineering the app's binary code to understand its inner workings is a common technique in mobile app testing that's not usually needed for standard web app testing from the outside. Also, just setting up a dedicated mobile testing environment, which might involve using emulators, simulators, or actual physical devices that might need to be jailbroken or rooted.
Okay.
And using specialized mobile security testing tools also presents unique setup and usage challenges compared to the more established tools and techniques for web app testing.
That's a great overview of mobile app security. Now let's move on to Module 6, Network and Infrastructure Testing. It's not just about the applications themselves, the shiny front end, but also the underlying systems that they rely on, right? The plumbing.
Absolutely. The security of the networks and the underlying infrastructure that support applications is just as critical, sometimes even more so. Vulnerabilities at this level can often have very widespread and significant consequences, affecting multiple applications or systems.
So if you're a bug hunter looking at network and infrastructure security for a program, where do you typically even begin your investigation? What's step one?
It generally starts with network reconnaissance and scanning, similar to web recon, but focused on the network layer.
Okay.
This involves actively gathering information about the target network structure, what IP address ranges are in scope, then identifying which devices are active within those ranges, what ports are open on those devices, and what services are running on those ports.
Finding the doors and windows.
Pretty much. Tools like Nmap are indispensable for this initial phase of mapping out the network landscape.
And once you have a map of the network and the services running, what's the next logical step for a tester?
The next step is often to try and identify and then carefully exploit any vulnerabilities that you might have found during the scanning phase or based on the services identified.
Like what kind of vulnerabilities?
This could involve attempting to leverage known weaknesses in specific network protocols, maybe exploiting misconfigured network services like an FTP server allowing anonymous access, or an exposed database, or even targeting vulnerabilities in the network devices themselves, like routers, firewalls, or switches if they're running outdated firmware, for instance.
Our outline specifically mentions wireless network security testing.
Yeah.
What are some of the key things that a bug hunter would be looking for in that domain, assuming it's in scope?
Yeah, if wireless is in scope, it has its own unique set of potential vulnerabilities. Testing often involves trying to discover nearby wireless networks associated with the target, identifying the security protocols they're using, hopefully WPA2 or WPA3, not older, weaker ones like WEP,
Right.
and analyzing the strength and configuration of their encryption mechanisms. Are they using strong passwords? Is WPS enabled and vulnerable? Techniques for attempting to gain unauthorized access to these networks, like password cracking attempts against captured handshakes, might also be employed, but only if explicitly permitted by the program rules. Wireless testing needs very clear authorization.
Firewalls and intrusion detection systems, or IDS, these are designed to be security controls, barriers. How do you go about assessing how effective they actually are? How do you test the defenses?
Assessing firewalls involves, first, if possible, analyzing their configured rules to look for any misconfigurations or overly permissive rules that might allow unauthorized traffic through.
Checking the rulebook.
Yeah. Then you would actively test these rules by attempting to send network traffic that should be either blocked or allowed based on the firewall's stated configuration and see if it behaves as expected, trying to bypass the firewall.
And for intrusion detection systems.
For IDS, or intrusion prevention systems, IPS, the goal is to see if they can correctly detect and maybe block known malicious attack patterns. You'd also want to evaluate their ability to identify and alert on suspicious activity without generating excessive false positives, which can lead to alert fatigue.
How do you test that?
You might try to send simulated attack traffic, carefully crafted packets to see if the IDS CPS triggers appropriately, or if you can perhaps evade detection using various obfuscation or fragmentation techniques.
Infrastructure misconfigurations sound like they could be a pretty common source of vulnerabilities, maybe easier to find than complex code flaws. What are some typical examples of what a bug hunter might be looking for?
Yeah, misconfigurations are definitely common and can occur in a wide variety of systems and services within an infrastructure. It's often about things being set up incorrectly or left in insecure default states.
Examples?
This could include things like leaving default credentials active on administrative interfaces for servers, databases, or network devices. Huge issue.
Default passwords, yeah.
Having overly permissive access controls on shared network resources or cloud storage buckets, running unnecessary services on servers that increase the attack surface, or even things like systems not being patched properly or timely. Even seemingly minor misconfigurations can sometimes be chained together by an attacker to create more significant security vulnerabilities. As our outline mentioned, command injection and file inclusion vulnerabilities can sometimes arise directly from infrastructure misconfigurations, not just application code flaws.
And what about after a bug hunter has managed to gain some initial level of access to a network? Say they exploited one misconfiguration, what might they do next within the rules of engagement?
Right. Assuming the rules allow for it, that's where post-exploitation techniques come into play. Once you have a foothold on one system within the network.
The beachhead.
Exactly. You might try to gather more information about other systems on the internal network that weren't visible from the outside. Look for ways to move laterally from the initially compromised system to other systems, maybe by exploiting trust relationships, finding shared credentials, or discovering other internal vulnerabilities.
Moving deeper inside.
Yeah, and potentially attempt to escalate your privileges on the initial system or others to gain higher levels of access, like becoming an administrator. The goal, from a testing perspective, is to see how far an attacker could potentially go once they've gained that initial entry point, to demonstrate the full risk.
This all sounds quite technical and potentially impactful, maybe even more so than application testing sometimes. Feels like it's more important than ever to remember those ethical and legal boundaries during this kind of testing, isn't it?
Absolutely. Critically important. Throughout all network and infrastructure testing, strict adherence to legal and ethical guidelines is paramount. You must have explicit, unambiguous authorization to conduct any testing.
Explicit permission.
Yes. You must always respect the privacy of the target organization and its users, avoid disrupting services, and operate strictly within the defined scope and rules of engagement of the bug bounty program. Crossing lines here can have very severe consequences, legally and professionally.
Let's dive into the active questions for Module 6. First, how could having a really detailed map of an organization's network, the kind you build during reconnaissance, help you, as a bug hunter, figure out the best places to start looking for security problems?
Well, a comprehensive network map provides you with a visual or at least logical overview of all the interconnected systems and devices within the organization's infrastructure that are in scope.
Seeing the whole picture.
Exactly. This helps you identify potentially critical assets, like domain controllers or key database servers. It shows potential entry points that are exposed directly to the internet versus internal systems, and it helps understand the relationships and trust boundaries between different parts of the network. With this knowledge, you can strategically focus your testing efforts on the areas that are most likely to have vulnerabilities, maybe older systems, or systems with many open ports, or the areas where a successful exploit would have the greatest impact. It guides your strategy.
What would you say is the core difference in how you would typically gather initial information about an entire network compared to how you would gather information about just a specific website or web application? How does recon differ?
When you're looking at a network, your initial information gathering often involves more active scanning across ranges of IP addresses to discover live hosts and identify the network services they are running on specific ports. You're looking at network protocols, port statuses, maybe OS fingerprinting. It's broader.
Okay. Active network scanning.
Right. When you're investigating a specific website or web application, the initial reconnaissance often focuses more on passively gathering information first. Things about the domain name, subdomains, the technologies the website is using, CMS, frameworks, etc. Maybe finding related domains or IP addresses through DNS lookups and OSINT. You're trying to understand the web application structure and surface. While you might still do some active scanning of the web server later, the initial focus for web recon is often more passive and targeted at the application layer.
Imagine you've successfully gained some level of access to one computer within a company's internal network, maybe through a phishing simulation allowed by the rules or exploiting a public-facing server. How might you then try to leverage that initial foothold to discover weaknesses in other systems that are also on the same internal network?
Okay, so you're inside the perimeter. This is where techniques like pivoting and lateral movement come into play, again, if allowed by the scope. Yeah, using the compromised system as a jumping-off point. Once you've compromised one system, you can use it as a base to scan and probe other internal IP addresses and systems that might not have been directly accessible from the outside internet.
Looking around from the inside.
Exactly. You might look for internal network shares with weak permissions, other servers running accessible but unauthenticated services, or try to identify user credentials cached on the first machine that might be reused on other systems. Or maybe sniff internal network traffic for sensitive information, if permitted.
Okay.
The goal is to expand your reach within the internal network by exploiting internal trust relationships or finding additional vulnerabilities on other connected systems that are only visible from within. It demonstrates how an attacker could move through the network after an initial breach.
That gives us a really good understanding of network and infrastructure testing. Okay, let's move on to our final content module, Module 9, Bug Bounty Tips and Strategies. We've covered a lot of the what and the how. Now let's talk about how to actually be successful and maybe efficient in this field.
Exactly. This module is packed with practical advice and strategies that can really help someone maximize their effectiveness and, hopefully, achieve more consistent success in their bug bounty hunting endeavors. It's about working smarter.
First up is maximizing efficiency. Bug hunting can take a lot of time. What are some of the key strategies that experienced bug hunters use to make the most of their time and effort?
Yeah, efficiency is key. Our sources highlight several crucial aspects. First, a deep understanding of your target is fundamental. The more you know about the system, the technology stack, the business logic, the better you can focus your efforts.
Know your enemy, so to speak.
Kind of, yeah. Comprehensive reconnaissance, as we've discussed multiple times, is essential for identifying potential areas of weakness early on. Don't skimp on recon.
Okay.
It's also incredibly valuable to learn from past vulnerabilities, understanding the types of flaws that have been found in similar systems or by this company before can guide your current testing. History repeats itself.
Right. Learn from others' reports.
Definitely. Use automation tools wisely for repetitive tasks like subdomain enumeration or directory brute forcing, but always combine automation with thorough manual testing for deeper analysis and finding logical flaws automation misses.
Automation plus manual.
Yep. Adopt a systematic approach, have a methodology to ensure you're covering all the bases, but don't be afraid to think creatively and try unconventional approaches sometimes. Bugs hide in weird places.
Think outside the box.
Yeah. Good documentation of your findings as you go is absolutely critical for clear and effective reporting later. Don't wait till the end. And of course, continuous learning is vital in this constantly evolving field. You have to keep up.
And collaboration.
Finally, don't underestimate the power of ethical collaboration with other researchers if the program allows, and you approach it correctly. Bouncing ideas can be powerful.
Identifying low-hanging fruit sounds like a smart way for someone new to a program, or maybe new to bug bounty overall, to potentially get some early wins and build momentum. What are some common examples of these easier-to-find vulnerabilities?
Yeah, low-hanging fruit often includes basic input validation issues where the system doesn't properly check or sanitize data you enter. This can lead to things like simple reflected XSS or maybe very basic injection flaws.
Okay, the simple stuff.
Right. Misconfigurations in servers or applications are another big source. Things like default passwords that haven't been changed, administrative interfaces that are unintentionally exposed to the public internet, maybe overly verbose error messages that leak information.
Info disclosure.
Yeah. Looking for outdated software versions, the web server, the CMS, libraries that have known publicly disclosed vulnerabilities, CVEs, is another area where you might find easier wins. These are generally the types of flaws that might be simple to identify and exploit, good starting points.
Understanding and carefully following the rules and scope of a bug bounty program seems absolutely essential. We've hit on this a few times, but what are some key tips for effectively navigating those program guidelines to stay out of trouble and not waste your time on out-of-scope stuff?
It really can't be stressed enough. The first and most important tip is to read the entire program documentation, the policy, the scope page, very, very carefully, every word.
Read the manual.
Exactly. Make sure you have a clear understanding of exactly which assets, domains, IPs, applications are in scope, and just as importantly, which are explicitly out of scope.
Know the boundaries.
Yes. Pay close attention to any specific rules of engagement. The program outlines like, are they okay with vulnerability scanning? What about denial of service testing? Usually not. Understand the program's definitions of different vulnerability types and their severity levels as this affects payouts.
Okay.
If anything at all is unclear, even slightly ambiguous, don't guess. Use the designated communication channels, email, platform messages to ask for clarification before you begin any testing.
Ask first.
Always focus your efforts on the in-scope targets. Test with integrity and respect for the system and its users. Avoid destructive testing. Report your findings clearly, concisely, and according to the program's specific submission guidelines. Stay informed about any updates or changes to the program rules. They can change. And always maintain a professional and respectful demeanor in all your communications with the program team. Build a good relationship.
Our outline also mentions the benefits of collaborating and sharing knowledge within the bug bounty community. How can engaging with other researchers actually be helpful? Isn't it competitive?
It can be competitive, sure, but engaging with the community can also provide significant benefits. Joining online platforms and forums dedicated to bug bounty hunting, places like Twitter, Discord servers, specific platform forums, allows you to connect with other researchers.
Is that working?
Yeah. You can share insights you've gained, responsibly of course, not disclosing active vulns, and learn from their experiences, techniques, and perspectives. Remember to always respect community guidelines and contribute constructively. Collaborating on specific, complex targets or challenges ethically and within program rules, maybe teaming up if allowed, can sometimes lead to the discovery of more intricate vulnerabilities that you might not have found on your own. Two heads are often better than one.
True.
If there are relevant security conferences or local meetups, attending those can also be valuable for networking and learning. Staying updated on new tools and techniques through community channels, sharing responsible disclosure practices, giving credit where credit is due, and collaborating, and generally being a supportive member of the community all contribute to a positive and enriching experience and can actually help your own success.
Finally, looking at the big picture, what would you say are some overarching strategies or mindsets for achieving consistent success in the often challenging, sometimes frustrating world of bug bounty hunting?
Yeah, consistent success is tough. It takes work. It really boils down to a combination of several key factors, I think. A commitment to continuous learning is absolutely essential, non-negotiable. The threat landscape, defensive technologies, attack techniques, they're constantly evolving. You have to keep learning.
Lifelong learning.
Definitely. Developing a deep expertise in specific vulnerability classes, maybe becoming an expert in XSS or mobile security or cloud misconfigurations, can make you much more effective than trying to know everything superficially. Find your niche.
Specialize.
Can help, yeah. Adopting a methodical and organized testing approach, having that methodology is crucial for coverage. But as we said, you also need to cultivate creative and out-of-the-box thinking to find the non-obvious bugs.
Method plus creativity.
Exactly. Collaboration, as we just discussed, can provide valuable insights. Efficient time management is key, knowing when to dig deeper and when to move on. Writing clear, concise, and impactful vulnerability reports is absolutely essential for getting your findings recognized, triaged quickly, and rewarded appropriately.
Good reports matter.
Hugely. Maintaining professionalism in all your interactions builds trust and a positive reputation, which can lead to more opportunities. And perhaps most importantly, perseverance is vital.
Sticking with it.
Yeah, bug hunting can be challenging. You will spend hours, maybe days, looking at a target and find nothing. You'll get duplicate reports. You'll have reports closed as not applicable. So the ability to keep learning from those experiences, not get discouraged, and keep trying is absolutely crucial for long-term success.
Let's wrap up with the final active questions for this module, kind of summarizing some key takeaways. First, how can studying vulnerabilities that were discovered and reported in the past, maybe reading old write-ups or CVE details, actually help you in your efforts to find new security flaws in today's systems?
That's a great question. By studying previously discovered vulnerabilities, you gain a deeper understanding of the root causes, the common attack patterns, the mistakes developers tend to make, and the types of systems or code patterns that are often susceptible to certain kinds of flaws.
Learning from history.
Exactly. Many new vulnerabilities are actually variations on old themes or old bugs reappearing because of regression or similar coding mistakes elsewhere. Learning from the history of security vulnerabilities helps you develop a better intuition for where similar weaknesses might still exist in current systems, what indicators to look for, and how to test for them more effectively. It builds your pattern recognition.
When you're just starting to examine a new target in a bug bounty program, maybe on day one, what are some of the common, relatively easy to find weaknesses, that low-hanging fruit that you should be actively keeping an eye out for in those initial stages?
As we mentioned earlier, focusing on basic input validation flaws is often a good start. Simple reflected XSS, maybe basic error-based SQL injection if you're lucky. Looking for obvious misconfigurations is key early on. Default credentials, directory listings enabled, exposed administrative panels, information leakage in HTTP headers, or error pages.
The easy wins.
Yeah. And checking for the use of outdated software versions with known public vulnerabilities, CVEs, using automated tools or manual inspection. These are often the low-hanging fruit that can sometimes be identified relatively quickly and can provide some early successes and, importantly, help you start understanding the target better.
You've diligently read all the rules of a bug bounty program, cover to cover, but there's still something specific about what you're allowed to test, or maybe a technique you want to use that remains unclear in your mind. What is the absolute essential first step you should take before you initiate any testing whatsoever related to that unclear point?
The absolute essential first step in that situation is stop. Do not proceed with testing that specific thing. Then reach out to the program owners or security team through their designated communication channels and explicitly ask for clarification.
Ask the source.
Yes. Clearly state your question and the specific scenario. It is always, always better to seek explicit confirmation and ensure you're operating within the rules than it is to make an assumption and potentially violate the program's terms. That could lead to your report being rejected, getting banned from the program, or worse. When in doubt, ask.
Finally, why is something like never giving up, that is, perseverance, considered to be a really important trait for someone who wants to be consistently successful in the often challenging world of bug bounty hunting? Why is grit so important?
Because bug bounty hunting can be demanding and frankly discouraging at times. You might spend a significant amount of time, hours or days, meticulously analyzing a target without finding any significant vulnerabilities. That happens a lot.
The dry spells.
Exactly. You might submit what you think is a great finding, only to have it marked as a duplicate of something someone else found minutes earlier. Or a report might be initially rejected or downplayed, requiring you to provide more evidence or explanation. Perseverance is crucial because it's about not letting these inevitable setbacks stop you.
Keep going.
Yeah. It's about continuing to learn from every experience, refining your techniques, exploring different approaches, and ultimately increasing your chances of finding those valuable vulnerabilities over the long haul. It's about having the resilience to keep trying after hitting a wall and the determination to continuously improve your skills even when you're not getting immediate rewards. That grit often separates the consistently successful hunters from those who burn out quickly.
This has been a truly comprehensive and, I think, really insightful deep dive into the world of bug bounty programs. We've covered a huge amount of ground today.
We really have.
From the foundational concepts and essential ethical considerations all the way through to the crucial hacking skills across web, mobile, and network, and finishing with those really practical strategies for achieving success.
Yes, and as our sources clearly demonstrate, there's just a vast amount of information available out there for anyone who's interested in either understanding these programs better or maybe even actively participating in them. It's a field that really demands both that technical proficiency we talked about, but also, just as importantly, a strong and unwavering commitment to ethical principles.
Absolutely. And I think maybe the core message here, the takeaway, is that bug bounty hunting represents a really powerful intersection of ethical hacking skills, a dedication to continuous learning you have to keep learning, and a collaborative approach to actually enhancing security in our increasingly digital world.
Well said.
It's a field that's constantly evolving, constantly changing, offering significant opportunities, both financial and intellectual, for those who approach it with curiosity, skill, and crucially, that firm ethical compass. So maybe as a final thought for you listening, consider what aspects of this deep dive resonated most with you. Was it the technical challenges, the ethical considerations, the strategy, perhaps to delve into those areas even further?
Great suggestion.
Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.